Hi, welcome. My name's Kim, psychology student, adult orphan and grief coach, and I thought we would talk books today. It's December 29th. I finished my last book of the year yesterday and I thought we would go through my top. I haven't actually counted, so I have no idea. I'll let you know at some point. But my top books for this year, most of them are actually physical copies, which is great because one of my intentions for this year was to get through my physical TBR. So I think I've done okay. Surprisingly, a lot of my favourite books for this year were books that weren't necessarily on my TBR at the start of the year, books that I sort of randomly picked up along the way. Not all of them, there's a few exceptions, but let's just go and have a little chat and go through them in a completely random order in which they're piled here next to me. So let's just get to it, shall we? First on the pile is Charlotte McConaghy's Wild Dark Shore, and this absolutely shattered me. I would call this a romance mystery novel. I don't know if that is a genre, it is now. I've read two books by her now and I've loved both of them. It's about a father who lives on a remote island with three children and a woman who gets stranded there during a storm, and then the plot unfolds. It's got a pretty strong theme of grief, which for me, you know, I'm quite anything psychology, griefy, philosophy-y in books draws me in. Grief is not the main plot, but it's definitely woven through there, and it's a very tender representation of how we move with loss. That's all I say. Go and read it. It's fantastic. Then we've got Liza Ritzen's. She's a Swedish author, if I'm not mistaken. Is it? Yeah, Swedish. Her book When the Cranes Fly South. This very much reminded me of Fredrik Backman's books. He's one of my absolute favourite authors. If he's written it, I'll buy it. I think I might start doing the same with Liza Ritzen. This is essentially an account of the last days of an elderly man living alone with his dog. His wife's already passed. It's really tender. It gives such a glimpse into the fragility and vulnerability of coming to the end of your life. An exploration of how we treat the elderly, and I would consider this a must read for really anybody, but especially anybody with older relatives, tending to older people. It really made me reevaluate, how do I treat the older people in my life? Do I respect their autonomy enough? Do I respect their wisdom enough? Highly recommend. Complete surprise to me, My Good Bright Wolf by Sarah Moss is a memoir autobiography. I had never heard of Sarah Moss. I'm not normally a memoir-y, autobiography-y person, but this blew me away. It's written in a very unique way where she essentially dialogues with herself, and it sort of explores whether the narrator of a life is reliable. Just a little content warning, it explores her experiences with emotional abuse in childhood, with an eating disorder. She does it really well. I don't want to say too much about it because I think it's one of those books you just have to dive in if it's for you. For me, you know, being a psychology student, also being a person with a history of an eating disorder, this really hit home. And if I don't know when she wrote this, but if I had known about this when I still had my eating disorder, I would have 100% handed it to people in my environment just to give them a little glimpse into what it's like to live with a mind that you know is irrational, but that still very much governs your life. Really glad I picked this up, and I'll be reading more by her. Next up I have Lost in the Forest by Colin, Heber-Percy. You can see it's actually slightly annotated. I don't normally annotate my books. I've only started doing that this year, just to see if I might be able to remember a little bit more about what I read. Yeah, it's called Lost in the Forest, Notes on Not Belonging from the English Countryside, and Colin is a parish priest in England. I believe, if I remember correctly, this book is based on handwritten notes, just like little notes that he wrote whenever he went for a walk in the forest or in Spray. And it's a beautiful mix of nature writing, his own reflections on life, on belonging, on not belonging mostly. Yeah, it's quiet, it doesn't try to drive a point home, it doesn't try to make a point. It's got some religious references, but it did not put me off in any way as a non-religious person. Just a really comfortable book, I would say. Another in the category nature writing, Losing Eden by Lucy Jones. I read both of these when we went to Wales earlier this year, I believe. Losing Eden, Why Our Minds Need the Wild is about why our minds need the wild, but it's also about our relationship with nature, with the world. It's about sustainability, but it's hopeful. It definitely has that undercurrent of activism. However, it comes from a really hopeful place, from a place of genuinely wanting people to connect with nature again and appreciate the world that we live in. I find it's a really enjoyable read with some beautiful examples and anecdotes of how around the world we're reconnecting with nature, and also through nature improving our lives, our mental health. Again, psychology student, it touches up on some of these topics. Then this one, so Mark Lawrence's library trilogy, I started the end of last year. I finished the last 2 books at the start of this year. I'm a little bit conflicted. I loved book 1 and 2. This is book 2 that I'm holding. The third one let me down a little bit. I still want it included though, because I think some of the topics he touches upon, it's a fantasy trilogy with a very strong philosophical political undercurrent, in the sense that he explores things like how should we govern knowledge? Should knowledge be accessible to everybody at all times, or should access be limited? But if it's limited, who gets to decide who gets access? But if everybody has access, does that have downsides? It explores very political, psychological themes like our tendency to villainize the other because it makes it easier to see them as the enemy, and how we're all somebody's enemy in their eyes. Yeah, if you're interested in philosophy, psychology, and just enjoy reading fantasy, then definitely pick this up. Award for the weirdest book I read this year is called Vita Nostra by, I'm going to butcher this, Marina and Sergey Dyachenko. They're Russian authors. This is the English translation. I saw this on Kate's channel and kind of randomly picked it up. One of my intentions the second half of this year was to try to read outside of my comfort zone a little bit. And I saw this, I was like, you know what, let's pick it up. I believe somebody on Goodreads described it as Harry Potter if Harry Potter had been written by Kafka, and I think it's a pretty apt description. I would tag them, check them out, whatever, but I couldn't find a review anymore, so I have no idea whose review it was. But yeah, it's about a girl who gets sent to what turns out to be an institute of magic, but it takes a while to really grasp that that's what it is. I know if you want to read about a unique magic system, this is it. It's dark, it's very surreal, weird, you kind of have to, or at least I had to really decide to get through those first few chapters. It's like, why am I reading? This makes no sense. And then it drew me in, and I will be hunting down part 2 or 3 if they're out in English already, because it turns out to be a series. I thought it was a standalone, but it turns out to be a series. I almost hesitate to call it dark academia because it is so much better than most of the books that would be called dark academia. But that's what it is, and it's fantastic, and it's different, and I'm slightly obsessed, can you tell? Go pick it up. Next I have The Disappearance of Rituals by, again I'm going to butcher his name, Byung-Chul, who's a German-Korean philosopher. I have a bunch of his books, and I definitely need to reread this, and I struggle to even tell you what it's about. I'll read out the first few lines on the back cover, which is, "Untrammeled neoliberalism and the inexorable force of production have produced a 21st century crisis of community. A narcissistic cult, authenticity and widespread turning inward are among the pathologies engendered by it. We are individuals afloat in an atomized society where the loss of symbolic structures inherent in ritual behaviour has led to the over-dependence on the contingent to steer identity." He is one of the few philosophers I've read. I'm trying to get into philosophy. I'm struggling, but I'm getting there. And as somebody who has lived with grief, works with grief, and works with ritual, because I very strongly feel like the two go hand in hand, I find this really interesting. Also, again, as somebody interested in psychology, he explores whether we as a society have become essentially too obsessed with ourselves, too obsessed with self-development, with being our own unique, authentic selves, and whether this constant turning inward has cut us off from community, from the world, and essentially from a richer life. I find his books pretty accessible for primary source philosophical reading. He's a modern, he's a lifer, he's a modern author, and really apt reflections of the society that we live in and that I think a lot of us struggle with. So highly recommend if you're up for some non-fiction. Next up, I've got Night Swimmers by Roisin Maguire. I believe she's an Irish author. I picked this up randomly at a bookshop somewhere in England, I believe, and I loved it. I think it kind of goes in the Fredrik, Backman, Liza Ridzen category in the sense that it's a really gentle, not slow read. It's a little bit more adventurous than Fredrik, Backman and Liza, I would say. But it says, Grace lives alone in a coastal village in Northern Ireland, filling her days with wild swimming, fishing, quilting and baiting the tourists who blow in from the city. One of the visitors is Irvin, on an enforced holiday from his family in Belfast as he grieves the death of his infant daughter. But before a week is out, he is struck there by lockdown. So this is set during the whole COVID lockdown situation. Again, has a theme of grief, but also of relationship and hope and connection. And I just find it a really heartwarming read and it made me smile. So, yeah, recommend. Obviously, this being my top reads of 2025. Gee, Kim, really? Okay, let me see if we can speed this up a little bit. Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I read 2 books by Fredrik this year. Are we on a first name basis? I feel like I'm on a first name basis with him. Anxious People and My Friends. I don't have a physical copy of My Friends. I believe I listened to it as an audiobook. I loved both. I think I loved My Friends even more than Anxious People, but I love anything by Backman because I feel like he has such a way of seeing the experience of being human and capturing it in words, and the very many ways in which we're all messy and imperfect and we fuck up and we hurt others and we are hurt, but ultimately there's also so much good in us. Yeah, I think he's well known. I won't say too much about them. Honestly, I feel like whichever one of his books you pick up is going to be amazing. Next, I read Stoner by John Williams. This was my... So I want to try to read a few more classics, modern classics, classics, whatever, but a few things that haven't come out in the last few years. And Stoner by John Williams was one of those books. I couldn't tell you why I loved it so much. It's an account of somebody's life. It's really kind of sad and melancholic and depressing, but also really beautiful. And I think for me in this phase of life, having lived with grief for a long time, but having very much been in the depths of it for the last 2 years, it's reminded me that we only have this one shot at life, and it really is what we make of it. I would say it's tragic in a way, but in a really simple, mundane, I don't know how to tell you. I'm sure somebody online will have written an amazing review about this. It wasn't me, but it is a great book. Alright, next up on the list of conflicting, I don't have the whole series here, but I have 3 out of the entire series of Brendan Sanderson's Stormlight archives to the extent they're out. I'm going to put them down because they're big and heavy. I spent the first about 6 months of this year reading the Stormlight archive, and it had ups and downs. I wasn't sure in the first book. I enjoyed the second book. I didn't like the third one that much. 4 went up. It's been a ride. I think the whole thing up until now has been about 6,000 pages probably. I just love a good fantasy series you can get lost in. I adore Sanderson's representation of mental illness, mental health struggles. Yeah, again, you know, I'm a psychology geek, okay, so this will be a recurring theme in everything I read and talk about, but yeah, I feel like the representation is there at a lot of levels. I know a lot of people have commented on how the magic system is really unique, which it is, just not as big of a factor for me personally. But if you want to completely submerge yourself in a fantasy series coming year, this would do the trick for you. We've come to the last one. I haven't even finished this yet, so I'm cheating a little bit by including it on this list, but this is Existential Psychotherapy by Irvin Yalom. I picked this up after reading Staring at the Sun by him, which also fantastic, by the way. It's very much a theory. It won't be for everybody. If you are not a psychology geek student, whatever, pick up one of his other books, maybe Staring at the Sun. Don't pick up Existential Psychotherapy straight away, because it does go in depth in theory. I'd already started it and then realised I'll be reading it for one of the courses I signed up for at Oxford coming year as well. I think if you are familiar with grief, you are familiar with essentially having an existential crisis, potentially at a time where most people haven't had it yet. More than most therapy, self-help, mental health, psychology, whatever books, or even more than some of my therapists, this book made me feel really seen and understood, but also made me understand myself better. And I'm hoping to be doing a video on it sometime the coming year. I am taking an existential therapies class at Oxford coming year. So I'll probably circle back to it, but I just want to give it a shout out because it really genuinely is, in the category of psychology books, one of the best books I've read in the I've read in the last years. So I just, I wanted to cheat a little bit and really put it on there, and then I'll just talk about it again next year, it'll be fine. Then for the, I thought I'd gone through the list, but I have two more ebook books. This is my ebook, my e-reader. Last two on my list of favourites, which is probably like 30% of what I read. I read about 52 books last year. I read Towards the Psychological Humanities by Mark something, I believe. Oops, sorry Mark. Which I adored because as I've been progressing through my psychology degree, I've really felt that it's become very far removed from the human experience. And in a way it makes sense because psychology wants to establish itself as a science. So, we are reducing everything to numbers, to causal relationships, to anything that is measurable. And I think a part of me shares the notion that not the entire human experience can be expressed in numbers. And so I was looking for books that explored, what are we losing by treating psychology as a science? Should it really not also have a place in the humanities? Should people who study psychology not also be taught sociology, anthropology, philosophy, at least to a degree? And this book does just that. Mark has a lot more experience in the psychological field than I do. But it was a really interesting read, and it's made me reflect on where I want to go in the future, studying psychology as potentially a therapist, and whether studying the mind is the same as studying the human experience and understanding it. So if that's your kind of thing, then go pick it up. And I read The Poppy War. And I read The Poppy War by Kuang at the start of the year. I really enjoyed it. I've seen some reviews online of people who found it frustrating, that at the end nothing was really resolved and it just kept sort of going, or the main character kept wavering in decisions and going back and forth, and I think that was the point. What I loved about it is that, yes, it's a fantasy series with younger main characters, like a lot of fantasy series have, but it actually portrays them in a realistic way. So I think there's a lot of fantasy series, especially romance series, and don't get me wrong, I have read them and I love some of them, and yeah, they can be great, but from a psychological perspective, what I really appreciate about Poppy War is that we don't get a 16-year-old with special gifts who gets more responsibility than she could possibly be ready for, leading armies to war and somehow coming out wildly successful and on top of the world, because I think 98% of the time that's not the realistic scenario. And I think what Kuang does really well in this series is explore what would actually likely happen if at a young age you were given too much responsibility and you were essentially, because I think that's what happens when you have extraordinary gifts and nobody to put your interests first. It's that you become the pawn in other people's games, right? Honestly, isn't that what we still would do? And I love that this series is really unsatisfying in a lot of ways. I don't want to go too much into it because I feel like I will ruin the plot for anybody who still wants to read the series. But if you are sick of kids in fantasy series being special and then ruining the world essentially, go and read this. It will frustrate you to no end. Right, my camera just died. I don't know where we were at, but yeah, it'll be frustrating to no end. But it's also really, really good, so go and read it. And that one of my favourites for this last year, this was also my first YouTube video, which you may or may not have noticed, we'll find out. So glad you watched, thank you. If you're still here, then thank you, yay. I hope to be recording more videos, or no, I don't hope, I will be recording more videos in the coming year. It will be a mixture of books because I enjoy reading, so I'll be doing a couple of videos on how I'm setting up my TBR for coming year, books I intend to read, and then maybe some of my favourites throughout the year. I'll also be doing videos on anything psychology related. You know, I'm 34, I'm back in undergrad. It's not where I thought I would be in life, but it is where I am, and I'm also a psychology geek. I also have a background in behaviour change, I'm an adult orphan, so I'll be exploring all of those things in future videos. So if that is something that you would be interested in and you're not completely tired of listening to my voice yet, then I hope I'll see you back here soon-ish. Feel free to subscribe already, but it feels a bit ballsy to ask you that after one video. So for now, at least like it. If you feel like jumping on the bandwagon, then yes, please do so. Thank you for watching. Catch you soon. Bye.